They walked in as complete men and left like empty shells. In 1902, three sisters changed their home into something worse than a jail, a place where your mind was no longer your own. Before we start this scary story that happened in the vineyards of La Rioja, we want to know where you are listening from today. Are you in Spain, in Latin America, or maybe in another part of the world? Leave us a comment and tell us where you are. And if real stories like this interest you as much as they interest us, subscribe to our channel and turn on the little bell, because what you're about to hear about the Llorente Sisters will change the way you think about how far human control can go. Believe me, you'll want to be here for the next stories we have ready. Now then, let's go into the quiet village, where three women kept a secret that no one should have found out. The summer of 1902 came dry and harsh to La Rioja. The vineyards stretched out like a yellowish-green ocean under the burning sun and among the rows of grapevines. Far from the village of Jarrow, more than 3 kilometers down a dusty road, stood the Weeping House. It was an old grey stone building, 2 floors tall with a red tile roof worn down by many years of wind and rain. The wooden shutters always stayed closed, even on the hottest days of August in La Rioja. No smoke came from the chimney and no clothes hung outside to dry in the sun. No dog barked in the yard. No rooster announced the morning, just silence. Isabel Magdalena and Rosa Llorente lived there, three sisters whose ages were between 35 and 42 years old. They had been orphans for 10 years. After their father died from pneumonia and their mother died just 2 years later from sadness, according to the gossiping people in town. The Llorente family had been wealthy in better times, vineyard owners with connections in Logroño, but bad decisions, debts, and having no male children had reduced their money to almost nothing. The sisters survived by selling small amounts of wine that they made themselves, taking sewing jobs sometimes, and, according to rumors, receiving occasional charity from some old family friend. But nobody in Jarrow knew them well. They barely came down to the village, they bought very little, they spoke with no one, and yet the house was not completely without visitors. Everything started to be noticed in the spring of that year when Julian Medina, a 38-year-old traveling salesman of farm tools, came to Jarrow looking exhausted. Julian was known throughout the area for his friendliness, his easy way with people, and his ability to sell even a rusty rake. But when he came back from his route through the nearby villages, there was something changed. He was pale, nervous. His hands shook as he held a glass of wine at the village tavern. "What happened to you, Julian?" the innkeeper asked, a fat, good-natured man named Esteban. Julian took a while to answer. He stared at the dark liquid in his glass. "I was at the Weeping House," he finally whispered. Esteban wrinkled his forehead. "Did the sisters buy something from you?" "I don't know what they bought," Julian said. His voice sounded empty. "I don't remember it well. I went in, they offered me tea, we talked. Or they talked. I don't know how much time passed. When I left it was already nighttime." He had entered at noon, 6 hours. Esteban laughed. "You got drunk with the old Llorente women." But Julian didn't laugh. He put the glass down on the bar with a shaking hand and left the tavern without paying. Nobody ever saw him smile again. 2 weeks later he quit his job and locked himself in his house in the nearby town of Santo Domingo de la Calzada and stopped speaking with his family, stopped going out. That was the first case, but not the last. In June, a young country teacher named Thomas Ibarra, just 25 years old, was sent from Logroño to check the education situation in the scattered villages throughout the area. His route took him to the Weeping House, because 3 adult women were supposed to live there who could read and write, something rare in that area. Thomas arrived one Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clear. He knocked on the dark wooden door with his knuckles. He waited. The door opened slowly. A thin woman, with a long face and dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, watched him from the doorway. She was dressed in black as if she was still mourning. Her eyes were deep, without brightness, like dry wells. "Yes," she asked in a soft voice, almost a whisper. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Thomas Ibarra from the Department of Public Education. I come to do an education count. Could I ask you a few questions?" The woman studied him in silence for several seconds. Then, without smiling, she opened the door a little more. "Come in," she said simply. Thomas went inside. The inside of the house was dark, even in the middle of the day. Shutters blocked almost all the natural light. Just a few candles lit in iron candlesticks dimly lit the hallway. The air smelled of dampness, burnt wax, and something else that Thomas couldn't identify. Something thick and sweet, almost sickening. "Sit down," the woman said, pointing to a wooden chair next to a low table. Thomas obeyed, feeling somewhat uncomfortable. He took out his notebook and his pencil. "Your name, ma'am?" "Isabel Llorente. I live here with my sisters Magdalena and Rosa." As if they had been called, 2 figures appeared from the darkness of the hallway. One was shorter, with a round face and sunken cheeks. The other one was taller, strongly built, with large, rough hands. Both were dressed in black. Both looked at him with the same silent intensity. "My sisters?" Isabel said. "They can also answer your questions." Thomas nodded, trying to keep his professional composure. "Very good. I just need to know if you can read and write, if you have received formal education, and if there are school-age children in the area." "We know how to read," said Magdalena, the shorter one, in a flat voice. "And write, our father taught us." "Or are there no children here?" asked Rosa, the tallest. "No, not in this house," Thomas replied. "I'm talking about the area in general." "There are no children in this area," Isabel said. "Just us." A heavy silence fell over the room. Thomas wrote some notes in his notebook, but he felt the gaze of the three women fixed on him. A strange pressure, almost physical. Would you like something to drink? Isabel asked suddenly. Tea. We have tea. Thomas was going to say no, but something in Isabel's tone didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a statement, as if he had already accepted. Yes, thank you, he said without knowing why. Rosa disappeared toward the kitchen. Isabel sat down across from him and Magdalena remained standing beside the door as if blocking it. Do you live alone, Mr. Ibarra? Isabel asked, leaning slightly forward. No, I live with my mother in Logroño.
And your father? He died 3 years ago. How sad,
said Isabel, although her face showed no sadness. You must miss him a lot. Tom swallowed. He didn't like talking about it. Sometimes, he whispered. Sometimes, Magdalena repeated from the door. That sounds like you have regrets. Tom's looked up uncomfortably. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, Isabel said gently. You feel guilty. Tom's heart skipped a beat. How could she have known? I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, Isabel insisted, and her voice was almost motherly. We all feel guilt. We all have secrets. We all carry something. Rosa returned with a tray, 3 steaming cups of tea. She offered one to Thomas. He took it automatically, like a robot. Drink, Rosa said, and Thomas drank. The tea was bitter, with a strange taste he couldn't identify, but he drank it all. And while he was doing this, the 3 sisters watched in silence, like hunting birds studying their prey. Tell us, Isabel said. What is it that you didn't tell your mother before your father died? And then, without knowing why, Tom started to speak. Tom Ibarra did not return to Logroño that night, nor the next, nor the next. When he finally appeared 3 days later, his mother almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight, he had deep dark circles under his eyes, he was shaking constantly, and didn't speak for hours. He would simply sit in the living room of his house, staring at the wall with glassy eyes. What happened to you, son? Where were you? His mother asked, terrified. Thomas didn't answer, he just kept muttering confused words. I shouldn't have said it. They know. I can't forget. His mother called the village doctor, Dr. Ruiz, an older man of almost 60 years with a grey beard and serious manner. The doctor examined Thomas. He took his pulse and checked his eyes. He has no fever. He has no injuries, but he is in a state of shock, the doctor said. Was there an accident? Was he robbed? I don't know. I'm a single mother. I only know that he went to do his job and came back like this. Dr. Ruiz did some research and discovered that the last address on Thomas's list had been the Weeping House. He frowned. He had heard rumors, nothing specific, just whispers at Jarro's tavern. Things about travelers who had passed through there and had returned changed. He decided to ask. In Esteban's tavern, the doctor found not only stories but names. Julian Medina, a mule driver named Fernando Ortega, a French traveler whose name no one remembered. They had all been at the Weeping House. They all came out different. So what exactly happened? The doctor asked. What's wrong? Esteban shrugged. Julian stopped talking. Fernando started having terrible nightmares. He wakes up screaming every night, his wife says. And that Frenchman, he ran away from the village. He said that the sisters knew things. I don't know what things. Dr. Ruiz wasn't superstitious, but a man of science. But he was also from Logroño and knew the importance of intuition. Something was happening in that house, something that wasn't supernatural, but yes, deeply disturbing. He decided to investigate more. He spoke with Fernando Ortega, the mule driver, a strong 43-year-old man, father of 4 children. Fernando lived in a small house on the edge of Jarro with his wife, Maria. When the doctor arrived, Maria received him with red eyes from crying. Thank you for coming, doctor. Fernando is no longer the same. He doesn't sleep anymore. He doesn't talk to me anymore. He barely eats. The doctor found Fernando sitting in the backyard looking at the horizon. His hands were shaking slightly. Fernando, the doctor said, approaching. I am Dr. Ruiz. Can we talk? Fernando looked at him. There's nothing to talk about. Your wife says that you were at the Llorente house. Fernando visibly tensed up. Yes. What happened there? Silence. Then, with a broken voice, they made me talk. Talk about what? About everything, Fernando whispered. About things that I never told anyone about, things I did, things I thought. They knew how to ask, they knew how to wait, and I spoke, and now I can't stop remembering. Remember what? Fernando covered his face with his hands. Things I forgot on purpose. The things that I buried, they dug them up, and now they're all here in my head all the time. Dr. Ruiz felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't witchcraft, it was something worse. It was psychological control. The Llorente sisters were using forced confession techniques, emotional questioning to break the people who entered their house. But why? The doctor decided that he needed to talk to someone else, someone in authority, someone who could act. He went to the civil guard station in Harrow. Sergeant Emilio Vargas was a tough 50-year-old man with a thick mustache and a suspicious look. He had seen everything in his 25 years of service. Robberies, murders, domestic violence, smuggling. But this was different. Let me see if I understand, Doctor, Vargas said, crossing his arms. You're telling me that 3 women who live alone in a village are psychologically torturing people. It's not physical torture, the doctor clarified. But they are doing something that destroys people, and we need to investigate. Vargas sighed. That's not a crime, doctor. Talking to someone isn't illegal. But the results should be. Julian Medina lost his business. Fernando Ortega cannot sleep. Tom Ibarra is almost catatonic. That's not enough. Vargas thought about it. He was right. Something was happening, and even if it wasn't technically a crime, they owed it to investigate. Okay, he finally said. I'll go talk with them, but without accusations, just questions. The doctor nodded. Be careful, Sergeant. Don't go in alone. Vargas smiled confidently. I've had 25 years in the Civil Guard, Doctor. I know how to deal with difficult people, but he didn't know who he was really dealing with. 2 days later, Sergeant Vargas and his assistant guard Antonio Salinas, a 23-year-old, rode horses to the Weeping House. It was mid-afternoon. The sun was shining brightly, but the house seemed to absorb the light, turning it into shadows. Vargas banged on the door forcefully. Civil Guard, open up. The door opened slowly. Isabel Llorente appeared with her black dress and her emotionless expression. Yes, officer. I am Sergeant Vargas. I need to ask some questions of you and your sisters. Isabel didn't move. Questions about what? About the people who have visited this house in recent months. Isabel bowed her head slightly. Have we done something wrong? That's what I came to find out. Can we come in? Isabel watched them for a long time. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, almost invisible, but it was there. Of course, come in. And Vargas and Salinas went inside. The door closed behind them with a gentle click. The wind started to blow among the vineyards, dragging with it a silence that seemed to be waiting for something. The inside of the Llorente house received Sergeant Vargas and Guard Salinas with the same heavy darkness that had surrounded all previous visitors. The candles burned in their candlesticks, throwing dancing shadows on the stone walls. The smell of wax and dampness filled the air, mixed with that sweet and hard, to identify smell that made breathing feel heavier. Isabel led them to the same room where she had received Thomas Ibarra. Magdalena and Rosa appeared from the darkness of the hallway as if they had been waiting. The three sisters moved with disturbing coordination, as if they shared just one thought. Please sit down, Isabel said, pointing to the wooden chairs. Vargas remained standing, as was proper for his position of authority. This is not a social visit, Mrs. Llorente. We are here in an official capacity. I understand, Isabel replied calmly. But courtesy is never a bad thing, don't you think? Salinas, the young guard, looked around nervously. There was something in that house that made him uncomfortable. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what, but he felt as if the walls themselves were watching him. We want to know about the people who have visited this house, Vargas said, taking out a notebook. Julian Medina, Fernando Ortega, Thomas Ibarra. They have all reported discomfort after being here. Discomfort? Magdalena asked, tilting her head. What kind of discomfort? That's what we need to know, Vargas replied. What did you do during their visits? We talked, Rosa said simply. We just talked. About what did you talk? About life, Isabel replied. About their worries? About their fears. It is natural, isn't it? When someone comes to our house, we treat them with hospitality, we offer them tea, we lend an ear. In these lonely times, we all need someone to listen to us. Vargas frowned. Several of those men have remained deeply affected. One of them lost entire days of his memory. Another can't sleep without having nightmares. That seems to you to be the result of a simple conversation. Isabel looked at him directly in the eyes. Her pupils were dark, deep. Have you ever confessed anything, Sergeant Vargas? Something that you'd kept for years, something that was eating you up from the inside. Vargas didn't reply. Confession, Isabel continued, can be freeing, but it can also be painful when we bring to light what we have buried. Sometimes we realize that we were not who we thought we were, and that can change a person. Are you admitting that you psychologically manipulate your visitors? Vargas asked sharply. I am saying that we listened, Isabel replied, and that sometimes the truth hurts more than any blow. Salinas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He felt that the conversation was taking a strange turn. Vargas noticed it too, but wasn't willing to be intimidated. I want to talk to each of you separately, Vargas said. Starting with you, Mrs. Isabel. The three sisters exchanged a glance. Then Isabel nodded. As you wish. Magdalena, Rosa, go to the kitchen. The two sisters obeyed without saying a word, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Vargas finally sat down, but Salinas remained standing beside the door watchful. Very well, Vargas said. Tell me exactly what happened with Tom Ibarra. Isabel settled in her chair, folding her hands over her lap. Mr. Ibarra arrived here about 3 weeks ago. He was a kind young man. Polite, he asked us some questions about education. We offered him tea. We talked. What did you talk about for 6 hours? About many things. About his work, about his mother, about his deceased father. Isabel paused as if she were remembering. Ibarra was carrying a very heavy guilt, Sergeant. Your father died waiting for him to follow his footsteps in the family business. But Thomas wanted to be a teacher. He wanted to study, and during the last years of his life he lied to his father. He promised he would return to the business, but he never did. When his father died, Thomas felt that he had betrayed him. Vargas wrote in his notebook, but something in the story worried him.
How do you know all that?
Told me. Why would he tell something so personal to a stranger? Isabel smiled slightly. Because I asked with the right words. Because I gave him the space to talk. Because I didn't judge. Sometimes, Sergeant, people just need someone to listen without condemning. But Thomas Ibarra got out of here wrecked. He came out of here facing his truth. Isabel corrected. That's not my fault. It's the result after years of denial. Vargas closed his notebook firmly. I'm not convinced, Mrs. Llorente. I think you do something more than just listen. I think you manipulate, you pressure, you exploit people's weaknesses. Isabel didn't flinch. And is that a crime, Sergeant? It depends on how you do it. We don't use violence, we don't use drugs, we don't steal, we're just talking. If that's a crime, then all the confessors of Spain should be in prison. Vargas clenched his jaw. Isabel was right about one point. There was no physical evidence of a crime, but there were victims, there was harm, there had to be more. I want to check the house, Vargas said suddenly. Isabel observed him calmly. Do you have a court order? I don't need a court order if I have reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. What criminal activity? Sergeant. Long conversations, bitter tea. Vargas stood up abruptly. Salinas checked the rooms. The young guard hesitated for a moment, then nodded and headed toward the hallway. Isabel did nothing to stop him. Salinas climbed the wooden stairs that creaked under his boots. He opened the first door he found. It was a simple bedroom, an iron bed, a nightstand, a crucifix on the wall, nothing out of the ordinary. He opened the second door, another bedroom just as plain. The third door was locked. What's in here? Salinas shouted from above. It's my private room, Isabel replied from below. I don't like it being checked. Open the door, Vargas ordered. There was silence, then the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. Isabel appeared next to Salinas with an old key in her hand. She put it in the lock and opened it. Salinas went in. It was a larger room than the others. There was a four-poster bed, a dark wood desk, and on the desk, dozens of notebooks stacked up. What is this? Salinas asked, approaching. My diary, Isabel said. And my sister's diaries. Salinas opened one of the notebooks at random. What he saw froze him. They were detailed records of each person who had visited the house, names, dates, and careful descriptions of their confessions. Julian Medina, April 14, 1902, confessed to having abandoned his pregnant wife 20 years ago. He never knew if the child was born, he never wanted to know. The guilt haunts him every night. Fernando Ortega, May 3, 1902, confessed to hitting his oldest son when he was little. The boy died 2 years later from an illness, and Fernando believes it was divine punishment. Tom Zabara, June 28, 1902, confessed to having wished for the death of his father for years so that he could live his own life without ties. Page after page, confession after confession, everything carefully written down. My God, Salinas whispered. Isabel watched him from the door. They're just notes, guard, memories. It's not illegal to write. Salinas ran down the stairs with two of the notebooks in his hands. Sergeant, you need to see this. Vargas read the pages with growing horror. It wasn't just that the sisters were listening, it was that they were extracting, recording, and keeping the darkest secrets of each visitor, as if they would collect souls. And why? Vargas asked, looking at Isabel with disgust. Why are you doing this? Isabel remained silent for a long moment. Then, in a soft voice, she replied, because if we keep the secrets of others, ours don't seem so terrible. And at that moment, Vargas understood something that made him feel sick. The Llorente sisters didn't do it out of meanness. They did it because they were broken, so worn down by their own past that they needed to absorb the pain of others to feel less monstrous. You're under arrest, Vargas said in a trembling voice. All three. Isabel didn't resist. Neither did Magdalena nor Rosa when Salinas led them outside, toward the horses. None of them said a word. But as they were leaving the house, Isabel turned toward Vargas and she whispered, You have secrets too, Sergeant. I see it in your eyes. Vargas didn't answer, but felt a chill that wouldn't leave him for years. The case of the Llorente sisters arrived in the city of Logroño like a silent whirlwind. News traveled fast in La Rioja, especially when it involved scandals that mixed the dark with the unexplainable. Local newspapers published careful headlines. 3 sisters arrested for psychological disturbance in Jarro. Strange case in a Riojan village generates legal controversy, but nobody knew exactly what crime to charge them with. The provincial prosecutor, Don Rodrigo Santamaria, was a careful 54-year-old man with decades of experience in the Spanish judicial system. He had prosecuted thieves, murderers, scammers, but this didn't fit into any known legal category. He met with Sergeant Vargas in his office at the Palace of Justice in Logroño, a plain stone building that smelled of old paper and ink. Explain to me exactly what these women did, said Santamaria, placing his reading glasses on his nose. Vargas handed him the notebooks taken from the Llorente house. The prosecutor glanced at them slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to disturbance with each page. This is monstrous, he whispered. But it's not technically illegal. What do you mean it's not illegal? Vargas protested. They destroyed the lives of at least 5 men that we know of, probably more. But they didn't use physical violence, they didn't steal, they didn't kidnap, they didn't threaten, they simply spoke, listened, and recorded what they listened to. They manipulated, Vargas insisted. They used forced confession techniques. Santamaria took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The church uses confession techniques for centuries, Sergeant. Should we arrest all the priests in Spain? This is different and you know it. I know it, the prosecutor admitted. But I need to find a legal basis. Intentional psychological harm could work. Emotional forcing. Maybe we can argue that they took away the psychological freedom of their victims. But the notebooks aren't evidence. They are proof that they documented conversations, not that they committed a crime. Unless we can prove that they used that information to blackmail or extort. Vargas clenched his fists. So, are they going to be released? I didn't say that, Santamaria answered. I said that we need to build a solid case, and for that we need testimonies from the victims. But obtaining testimonies turned out to be almost impossible. Julian Medina refused to testify. When the court officer went to look for him in Santo Domingo de la Calzada, he found him locked in his house with the windows boarded up. He didn't even open the door. "I have nothing to say," he shouted from inside. "Leave me in peace." Fernando Ortega did agree to meet with the prosecutor, but when the moment of the formal statement arrived, he collapsed. He cried for 20 minutes without being able to speak. His wife Maria had to get him out of the office, holding him as you hold a frightened child. Tom Zabara was the only one who retained some clarity, although he was still deeply affected. He agreed to testify, but when Santa Maria asked him what exactly the Weeping Sisters had done to him, Tom's took several minutes to respond. "They made me see who I really was," he finally said with a broken voice. "They made me admit things I never wanted to admit, not even to myself." "Did they force you? Did they threaten you?" "No," Thomas admitted. "They just asked and kept asking, and I kept answering. I couldn't stop. It was as if I needed to say it, as if they knew exactly what to ask so that I couldn't lie." "Did they offer you something, drinks, food?" "They gave me tea. It tasted bitter." "Did you notice anything strange about the tea, bitter taste, effects on your consciousness?" Thomas shrugged. "It tasted bitter, but I didn't feel drugged, just vulnerable, as if all my defenses had fallen." Santa Maria was furiously taking notes. This was insufficient for a conviction, but enough to keep them arrested while he investigated further. The Llorente sisters were imprisoned in the Logroño provincial prison, a gloomy 3-story building with small damp cells. They were separated, a standard measure for prisoners who could conspire together. Isabel was placed in a cell on the 2nd floor, Magdalena on the 1st, Rosa on the 3rd. They couldn't communicate with each other or receive visitors. And yet, something strange began to happen. The other prisoners, women convicted of theft, prostitution, or minor crimes, began to change. Some actively sought to be near the Llorente sisters. Others avoided them as if they were contagious diseases. One of the prisoners, a 38-year-old woman named Carmen, imprisoned for stealing from a store, asked to be transferred to another cell after spending 3 nights with Magdalena. "I can't sleep," she told the guard. "She doesn't do anything. She doesn't say anything. She just looks at me and I start thinking about things that I don't want to think about." The guard, a skeptical man named Luis, ignored her at first, but after a week he himself began to notice something disturbing. Every time he made his rounds at night and passed in front of Isabel's cell, he felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if something invisible were waiting for him. One night he couldn't resist the curiosity. He stopped in front of Isabel's cell. She was sitting on the cot facing the barred window. She wasn't moving. She didn't seem to notice his presence. "Llorente," Luz called. Isabel slowly turned her head. Her eyes reflected the dim light of the oil lamp in the hallway. "Yes, Mr. Guard. How can you be so calm? You're accused of serious crimes." Isabel smiled slightly. "I committed no crime. I only listened to what others meant." "You destroyed those people. They destroyed themselves," Isabel replied. "I only held the mirror." Luis felt a chill. "Don't you feel remorse?" "Why should I?" Isabel asked, tilting her head. "All those men lied for years. They lived fake lives. I only showed them the truth. If they couldn't endure it, that's their weakness, not my guilt." "That's monstrous." "No, officer, what is monstrous is living your whole life hiding who you really are. That's what destroys. I just sped up the inevitable." Luis wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come out. He walked away quickly, feeling that if he kept talking to her, he would end up confessing something he didn't even know he kept. Meanwhile, Dr. Ruiz, who had started the whole investigation, was called as an expert witness. Santa Maria needed a medical report on the mental condition of the victims and of the accused. The doctor spent 3 days interviewing the Llorente sisters separately. With each interview, his understanding of the case deepened, but also his restlessness. Isabel was the most articulate. She answered all the questions calmly, with cold and precise logic. She openly admitted that she extracted confessions from her visitors, but she maintained that there was nothing immoral about it. "Doctor," Isabel said during the second interview, "have you never wanted to know the truth about someone? Have you never been curious about what they really think, feel, and hide?" "That does not justify manipulation," the doctor replied. "I don't manipulate, I make it easier. People want to confess. We all carry burdens we need to let go of. I simply give them the safe space to do it, but afterwards they can't forget what they confessed. They remain traumatized because they never learned to live with their truths," Isabel replied. "That's not my responsibility. It's of doctors like you, of the society that taught people to lie instead of facing it." The doctor wrote in his report, "Isabel Llorente shows signs of emotional disconnection and lack of deep empathy. However, she does not present with delusions or disconnection from reality. She is fully aware of her actions and their results." Recommendation: extended psychiatric evaluation. Magdalena was more reserved. She responded with single words, but when she spoke, her words were equally disturbing. "Why were you doing this?" the doctor asked. "Because we could," Magdalena replied simply. "And didn't you think it was wrong?" "Wrong?" Magdalena laughed without humor. "Our Father made us confess every night. He made us kneel and tell him every impure thought, every forbidden desire. He punished us if we lied. He punished us if we didn't say enough. We learned that words can be weapons, and whoever controls the confession controls the person." The doctor felt nausea. Now he understood. The sisters had been victims first and then perpetrators. Rosa was the most emotionally unstable. During her interview, she cried several times, but her tears were strange. They didn't seem to be expressions of regret, but of frustration. "We just wanted someone to be honest," Rosa said between sobs. "Everyone lies all the time. Why are we the bad guys for asking for the truth? The doctor finished his report with a disturbing conclusion. The Llorente sisters are not psychotic, they are not schizophrenic. They are the product of a severe childhood trauma that they developed into a pathological survival mechanism. They use forced confession as a form to process their own pain. They are dangerous not because of physical violence, but for their capacity to destroy the psychological stability of others. I recommend indefinite psychiatric hospitalization. When Santa Maria received the report, he knew he had enough for a trial, not for a conventional crime, but for intentional disturbance of another's mental order with serious results. A legal figure rarely used but existing in the Spanish code of the time. The trial was set for October 15, 1902. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from all over La Rioja and some nearby cities arrived to cover the case. The people of the town of Jarrow filled the public benches. They wanted to see the Llorente sisters. They wanted to understand what kind of women could do something like this. When the sisters were led into the courtroom, handcuffed and dressed in simple prison clothing, a murmur rippled through the audience. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like ordinary women, thin, pale, silent, but their eyes scanned the room with an intensity that made several spectators look away. Judge Sebastian Morales, a severe 60-year-old man, struck with his gavel. The session is now open. Prosecutor, please present your case. Santa Maria stood up and began to explain the facts. He described each victim, read excerpts from the taken notebooks. He presented the testimony of Dr. Ruiz. When it came time for the defense, the assigned lawyer, a young man named Ernesto Diaz, did the best he could with what little he had. Your Honor, my clients did not commit any violent acts. They didn't rob, they didn't kill, they didn't physically assault anyone, they simply talked. Since when is talking a crime? When the conversation is used as a psychological weapon, Santa Maria replied. And who decides where the line is? Diaz argued. A confessor does the same thing. A psychiatrist extracts confessions. Where's the difference? The difference, said Santa Maria in a firm voice, is the intention. My clients didn't seek to help, they sought to control, destroy, and they succeeded. The judge called Thomas Ibarra to testify. The young teacher went up to the witness stand trembling. He still had dark circles under his eyes. He still looked fragile. Ibarra, Santa Maria began. Describe what happened in the Llorente house. Thomas took a deep breath. I went in like a complete man and I came out like an empty shell. And then, with a broken voice, he told everything. The testimony of Thomas Ibarra lasted almost 2 hours, how the Llorente sisters received him with apparent kindness. How the tea had a strange taste, but not unbearable. How the questions started out innocent. His work, his family, his plans. But then the questions changed. They asked me if I was proud of my life, Thomas said with a trembling voice. And I said that yes. Then Isabel looked directly at me and said, Are you sure, or do you just repeat it to yourself to convince yourself? The room remained in absolute silence. And then Thomas continued. I began to doubt. I started thinking about all the times I lied to my father, every broken promise. And they continued asking, they kept waiting, and I couldn't stop talking. It was as if I needed to empty myself, as if they had some kind of power over me. Did they physically harm you? Santa Maria asked. No, they never touched me, they never raised their voices. They just stared at me and asked and waited. And I kept talking for hours until I said things I had never said to nobody, not even myself. And how did you feel afterward? Thomas covered his face with his hands. Empty, as if they had taken something fundamental, as if I no longer knew who I was. The Judge Morales leaned forward. Mr. Ibarra, do you feel you were the victim of a crime? Thomas took a while to answer, then in a barely audible voice, yes. Even though there were no weapons, even though there was no blood, yes. Santa Maria then called Dr. Ruiz, who explained in medical terms what the sisters did, a form of psychological manipulation based on the systematic extraction of confessions, using techniques of emotional questioning, taking advantage of moments of vulnerability and creating an environment of constant psychological pressure. Similar, the doctor explained, to what some military questioners or police do. But instead of looking for information to solve crimes, the Llorente sisters were looking to feed off the pain of others in order to reduce their own. When it was the defense's turn, Ernesto Diaz tried one last strategy to present the context. He called several Jarrow residents who knew the story of the Llorente family to testify. A woman, Doga Pilar, recounted how the father of the sisters, Don Aurelio Llorente, was known for his extreme strictness. He was a tough man, said Doga Pilar, very religious, very strict. It was said that he punished his daughters for any small mistake, that he made them confess every night all their sins, real or imaginary ones, and that if they did not confess enough, he punished them in various ways. Another neighbor, a man named Miguel, remembered how the weeping girls never played with other children. They were always locked up, always in that house. The mother was sweet but weak. She couldn't protect them from their father. When he died, we thought they would be freed, but I think it was already too late. Diaz used these testimonies to argue that his clients were also victims of an abusive father that had turned them into what they were. Does that excuse them of responsibility? Santa Maria asked during his reply. Does being a victim give you the right to create new victims? Judge Morales withdrew to deliberate. 3 hours passed before he returned. The room rose to its feet when he entered. The judge sat down and took his notes and looked directly at the Llorente sisters. This court has reached a conclusion, he said gravely. The accused Isabel, Magdalena and Rosa Llorente are guilty of intentional disturbance of another's mental order with serious results. However, due to extenuating circumstances related to their own childhood trauma, the penalty will not be conventional imprisonment. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The accused will be hospitalized indefinitely in the provincial asylum of Logroño, where they will receive psychiatric treatment. They will not be able to have contact with outsiders without medical supervision, and the weeping house will be permanently closed. No one will be allowed to live in that property. Isabel showed no emotion whatsoever. Magdalena lowered her head. Rosa closed her eyes. The sisters were led outside the room in the tense silence among the spectators. Nobody applauded, nobody shouted, just heavy, uncomfortable silence, as if everyone understood that what they had just witnessed was not ordinary justice, but something more complex and disturbing. Years passed. The Llorente sisters remained hospitalized in the asylum until their death. Isabel died in 1919 of pneumonia, Magdalena in 1923 of heart failure. Rosa survived until 1931, becoming the oldest resident of the institution. Throughout those years, none of them showed true repentance, but neither did they ever manipulate anyone again. They simply existed silently in their individual cells. Regarding their victims, each went their own way as they could. Julian Medina never recovered his previous life. He died alone in 1908 in his walled-up house in Santo Domingo de la Colzada. His body was found 2 weeks later. Beside him was an unsent letter where he had written a single phrase, repeated hundreds of times. I shouldn't have told anyone. I shouldn't have told anyone. I shouldn't have told anyone. Fernando Ortega achieved a certain recovery thanks to the unwavering support of his wife Maria. He went back to work, although he never again became the same jovial man as before. In his last years, before dying in 1920, he confessed to Maria, "The worst is that what they made me say, it was discovering that it was true." Tom Zabara was the only one who succeeded in rebuilding something resembling a normal life. He left teaching and moved to Barcelona, where he worked in a bookstore. He got married, had 2 children, but he never spoke about what happened in Loyoja, not even with his wife. He kept that secret until his death in 1954. And the Weeping House? The house remained empty for decades, officially closed. Nobody could buy it. No one could live there. It became a kind of unintentional monument to psychological horror. The vineyards around it were sold and worked by new owners, but nobody approached the house. The countryside workers made detours to avoid it. Children from the village invented stories about it, some true, others exaggerated. Over time, the structure began to fall apart. The roof partially collapsed, the shutters rotted, the walls started to crack. But there is something the locals swear to until today. The house is never completely silent. On certain nights, especially in autumn, when the wind blows through the vineyards, those who pass by say they hear whispers, not clear words, just murmurs, as if the house itself continued extracting confessions from the ghosts that left part of their humanity there. In the 1960s, there was an attempt to demolish the structure. A construction crew arrived with orders from the Jaro Town Hall, but after 2 days of work, the workers refused to continue. Several reported nightmares. One had a nervous breakdown and had to be hospitalized. The project was abandoned. The house is still there among the modern vineyards of La Rioja, partially hidden by the vegetation that has grown around it. Officially, it belongs still to the Llorente family, although there are no living descendants. Legally, it's in an administrative limbo, and nobody wants it because in La Rioja, everyone knows the story. Everyone knows what happened there, and everyone understands that there are places where human pain leaves marks so deep that not even time can erase them. Dr. Rees, who outlived all the sisters and died in 1943 at 82, wrote in his private memoirs discovered after his death, "I have seen many things in my medical career. Horrible diseases, terrible accidents, violent deaths, but nothing disturbed me as much as the Llorente sisters. Not because they were evil in the traditional sense, because they proved something that we would prefer not to know, that the most powerful, devastating weapon that exists is not the knife, the poison, or the fire. It's the truth used not to liberate but to destroy, and that any of us under the right circumstances could be the victim of it, or worse, the perpetrator." Sergeant Emilio Vargas, who led the initial investigation, never spoke publicly about the case after the trial, but his son, in an interview made in 1975, recalled how his father changed after entering that house. "He used to be a confident man," the son said. Afterwards, he always seemed to be doubting, as if something he thought he knew had collapsed on him. "He never told me what, but I knew that it had to do with those women." Today, in 2025, the Llorente house remains a point of interest for researchers of psychological phenomena, local historians, and the morbidly curious. Although entry is not allowed, some brave souls have tried. Most don't last more than a few minutes inside before leaving running. Not because there are ghosts, not because there is physical danger, but because, in their own words, the house makes you think about things you don't want to think about. It makes you remember things that you had forgotten on purpose. It makes you face versions of yourself that you'd rather not know. Some modern psychologists have studied the Llorente case as an early example of systematic psychological manipulation. The techniques that the sisters used, emotional questioning, constant pressure, exploitation of vulnerabilities, creation of a controlled environment, are similar to those used by cults, unscrupulous questioners, and expert manipulators. But what makes the Llorente case unique is that they didn't do it for money, nor for political power, nor religious fanaticism. They did it because it was the only way they knew how to exist. They had been so destroyed by their father that the only way to feel complete was destroying others in the same way. It was a repeating cycle of trauma, a wound that created more wounds. And perhaps the most terrifying thing of all is that nobody in 1902 had the tools to stop it before it happened. There was no modern psychology, there were no child protection services, there was no awareness of intergenerational trauma. The Llorente sisters were victims who became perpetrators, and their victims carried that burden for the rest of their lives. On the cold nights of autumn in La Rioja, when the wind blows among the vineyards and the shadows stretch out long, the village elders still tell the story to young people as a warning, as a lesson. Not all evil takes the form of a monster, they say. Sometimes it takes the form of three women sitting in a dark room, offering you tea and waiting for you to speak. And somewhere, among the stone ruins of the weeping house, the silence keeps waiting. Waiting for someone to go in, waiting for someone to speak, waiting for someone to confess, because some houses never forget what happened within them. And some truths once spoken aloud can never be erased. This was the disturbing story of the Llorente sisters, a case that demonstrated that the most profound horror doesn't always come from what is supernatural, but from the terribly human. If this story impacted you as much as it did us when researching it, leave us a comment telling us what you thought. Were you familiar with this case? Do you think the sentence was fair? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we will continue to bring real stories equally impactful. And if you want more content like this, share this video so more people can learn about the darkest cases of history. See you next time, and remember, not all evil has fangs.